following podcast is recorded and produced by Emerge, a media creators co-op, in affiliation with the network at bicbb-radio.com.
Question: who is lying to you today? The media? Social media? Big business? Politicians? Actually, it's probably all of them. That led me to create this podcast named They're All Lying to Us. We do research and present findings and opinions on political, social, and cultural topics to inform our communities about what's really going on. You know, stuff that affects everyday American life. We also invite you to share your voice and help us recreate real-life interactions as they were had in the pre-digital era. I'm your host for these conversations. My name is Andy. Welcome, everybody, to another episode and podcast of They're All Lying to Us. Today is May 2nd, 2024, so that is our recording date. And as always, I remind everyone that you can find the materials along with the links to some of the things that we talk about in articles and blogs on our website, www.lyingtous.com. That's www.lyingtous.com. And we call our little shindig here, They're All Lying to Us. And our little short name for it is Tell Us. So I welcome you to another broadcast. My name's Andy. And today's topic is something that's going on all across the country. And we're trying to find a little bit of a newsy update for you, but also a little different take on what's going on in the country across our campuses across the country where we're finding protests regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. So today's session I've called A Life Lesson for University's Best and Brightest from Your Dumb and Dumber Elders. American college campuses are on fire with protests over the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Just like one might find on TikTok, the protests are largely focused against Israel's oppression of Palestinians, and the protests are a show of support for the Palestinian cause. Aside from disrupting college campus life, there has been allegations of threats of violence against Jewish students and anti-Semitic, anti-Israel chants from some protesters. The protests seem to have been initiated at elite universities like Columbia University in New York City and spread to other campuses. Since students seem to be distracted from their regular studies, and since we can't resist irony, Talus has decided to try and educate our best and brightest about American life, and moreover, give a lesson in law and order. Now, as far as law and order goes, I want to talk for a moment about one of the episodes from the TV show Law and Order, which has been running for over 20 years. And this episode is called Admissions. And it ran in season 9, episode 22, which for time reference was about 1999 from the Law and Order episode series. And let me give you a little summary. So the core of today's lesson is exemplified by this episode from one of America's classic television shows. And in that version or that episode, let me give you again the quick summary. There's a murder of a young female student named Sarah Kincaid, which occurs on the campus of Hudson University, which coincidentally seems to be the fictionalized version of Columbia University. The police investigation ultimately leads them to their primary suspect, Kincaid's classmate, Dennis Michaels. Now, Michaels is a friend of Peter Kelly, and Peter Kelly gives Michaels an alibi, though the truth is that Kelly was present when Michaels killed Sarah Kincaid. Now, Michaels helped Kelly cheat to pass his classes, so Kelly felt obligated to cover for him. As the episode wears on, prosecutor Jack McCoy pressures Kelly to reveal the truth and eventually gets Kelly's wealthy father to assist. The father proceeds to lay down the law with his son, who eventually cooperates in implicating Michaels. Now, the scene that sticks in my brain from this show is when the wealthy father comes to the district attorney's office and tells the son, that's Kelly, Words to the effect, "This is how things happen in the real world. I suggest you step into it." As a parent myself, this sort of reality-based guidance I give to my own children, and it's led me to be called the dream crusher at my home. But for them, and for the anti-Israeli best and brightest protesters at elite universities, it is a lesson that needs to be learned. Question I ask myself is, can we have American protests without the hating on America? Now, the right to peaceably gather to protest is a hallmark of American democracy. Certainly, some self-criticism and debate can be helpful to the country getting things right, or at least moving in a better direction. While we need to learn the mistakes of history, as so often is said, we do not need to repeat them. It is somewhat of an overstatement that America is a primary source of evildoing in the world. Turning to the plight of Palestinians in Gaza, the Israeli response has dragged on for months and has been intensive. And considering the toll on Palestinians in Gaza, the case for protesting U.S. support of Israel seems to make some sense. However, student condemnation and protests against Israel and U.S. support of Israel started immediately after Hamas attacked Israeli civilians on October 7th. And it should not come as a surprise to well-educated students that America would pledge its support to its longtime ally, Israel. And this ally in that region functions as a lonely beacon of democracy and capitalism in the region we call the Middle East. And this is especially true considering the horrific nature of Hamas's civilian attacks, including a massacre of many college-aged Israelis at a concert. Nevertheless, even before Israel had mounted any sort of military response, protests in America had started, and college students seemed poised to voice their disapproval of Israel's treatment of Palestinians. At Harvard, dozens of student groups signed onto a letter from the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, or PSC, on October 7th, the day Hamas launched its surprise attack on Israel. And the PSC was holding Israel, quote, entirely responsible for all unfolding violence, unquote. In another act soon after October 7th, the president of New York University, that's NYU, their student bar association, wrote that, quote, Israel bears full responsibility for this tremendous loss of life, unquote, in a letter he wrote to a group that quickly went viral and drew widespread condemnation. Now, true to our they're all lying to us name, we of course need to point out as well that there is further evidence that misinformation and disinformation played a role in shaping and increasing the immediate outrage against Israel in the days after October 7th. We also wonder if the contributions to universities from Arab countries such as Qatar might be influencing professors and programs. Disinformation, misinformation, and other forms of influence seem to find fertile ground in young, progressive university students, a group ready to embrace a cause fitting the, quote, woke style principle, which characterizes America and its allies as oppressors of the oppressed. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and take a look here at the irony of elite university students hating on America. And I'm going to do this in a series of points. Point number one, America benefits overall from its global policies, and the greatest of those benefits accrue to the elites. Now, one of the smart people, a professor from Harvard, points out that America's role in a more integrated global economy, combined with technology, have created new industries and opportunities, mainly benefiting those with the capital and education to leverage these changes. I'm going to quote a section from his statements. Quote, as a result, wealth has become increasingly concentrated in the United States. Today, the richest 20% of American households own 77% of the country's wealth, more than 3 times that owned by the entire middle class. the middle class making up 60% of households. Even more striking, the richest 1% of American households own substantially more than the middle class combined. And you can bet, that was the quoted section. Now, you can bet that the bachelor's degree graduates of Columbia, many of whom make more than $100,000 per year within a few years of graduation, are likely benefactors of America's global endeavors. Point number 2, protesting students at Columbia and similar institutions are, or on their pathway to becoming, elites themselves. So we have the global system that benefits elites, and then these groups, protesters, many of them are the elites. Now, supporting the theory that graduates of elite universities occupy a privileged position in America, New York Times journalist David Brooks wrote a thought-provoking article last year. At its core, the article questioned whether the durability of support for Donald Trump might be in part caused by the systems elites have implemented. Brooks wrote, quote, "Members of our class are always publicly speaking out for the marginalized, but somehow we always end up building systems that serve ourselves. The most important of those systems is the modern meritocracy. We built an entire social order that sorts and excludes people on the basis of the quality that we possess or that possess most. Academic achievement," unquote. So Brooks goes on to describe how journalism has become more elitist, with more than 50% of the staff writers at the New York Times and Wall Street Journal having attended one of the 29 most elite universities in the nation. So point number 1, global stuff that the U.S. does benefits the U.S. broadly, but especially the elites. Point number 2, a lot of the people protesting now are probably in that elite class. And point number 3, maybe the conclusion of this is that many protesting students at elite universities dislike the United States because they see it as an oppressor. And as we pull back to the 30,000-foot view, here's how one conservative outlet framed the university protests way back in November. Quote, "Americans are finally catching on that the oppressor-oppressed narrative being taught in our schools and universities is not a conspiracy theory disseminated by conservatives. It's real. Jewish students having to barricade themselves in a college to escape a mob in Manhattan, of all places, has opened people's eyes to the threat woke ideology represents to civilization." Maybe a little bit of an overstatement in that quote, but you get the idea. A New York Times writer used the writings of economist Arnold Kling to describe the difference between progressive and conservative perspectives. Progressives, Kling wrote, see the world as a struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed, and they try to help the oppressed. Conservatives see the world as a struggle between civilization and barbarism, between order and chaos, and they try to protect civilization. Now, while I may be dumb and perhaps much dumber compared to the best and brightest at elite American universities, it seems that the anti-Israeli protesters may commonly fit within a group of progressives which, more broadly, dislikes America as an oppressor. The nature of some of the American progressive protests, including some items labeled woke, absolutely lead conservatives to believe the left hates America. And sometimes it makes moderates feel the same way. It seems over the top to hate on Columbus, blame America's southern border immigration problems on believed abuse of our Central and South American neighbors, and otherwise paint the universe as damaged primarily as a result of America acting as the oppressor of the oppressed. When it comes to the current Gaza protests, commentators who have suggested these students are not well educated when it comes to Palestinian-Israeli affairs. Combine that with the speed at which on-campus conversation went against Israel, even on October 7th, the attack day from Hamas, one can easily conclude that this dislike of America by progressives, or some progressives, is built in. Now, for my view, I think it's time for the protesters to step into the real world. Ultimately, it seems that the student protesters have been ineffective at swaying broader public opinion to meet their goals. As one writer put it, quote, effective protests always connect means and ends. What makes the current round of protests so confusing is the incoherence of the protesters' goals. What is the point of large encampments blocking access to buildings and shouting hateful slogans? Unquote. Student protesters do not have support from even left-leaning media outlets like MSNBC, where seemingly every talking head on the Morning Joe show talks against the protests. Protesters even seem to be flunking on social media, where I would have thought that intelligent youth would be masters at using social media to sway public opinion. Instead, they only seem able to use youth social media channels like SideChat or TikTok to impress their friends. While they did go old school with campus protests, they didn't seem to notice from their political science studies that the median age of the House of Representatives is 58 and the median age of the US Senate is 65. Nor did they take into account the major presidential candidates are 81 and 77 years old. This generation of leadership isn't on SideChat or TikTok. They're much more likely to be on Facebook. One can learn this in a digital media course. Plus, the older generation that makes up Congress and more mature voters are more likely to be law and order types than oppressor-oppressed disciples. I would have thought that students might have learned that in a sociology or psychology class or a history class, which covered the presidential election of 1968. And just as in 1968, when student Vietnam protests seemed to help get law and order candidate Richard Nixon elected, many sources are indicating that student protests may well lead to anti-progressive candidate Donald Trump winning in November. In assessing the campus protesters, one analyst concluded, quote, protesters like to claim that they are speaking truth to power. That is both noble and heroic. It is also rare because speaking the truth requires knowing the truth. And knowledge is just not acquired by joining the crowd and chanting slogans, but by taking the time to talk and listen, ask questions, debate, read, and think. It is a slow, arduous, and ultimately rewarding process. That's called education, unquote. Now for me, what's my conclusion? I may have a far inferior education to the university protesters, but I have a lot of life experience, including watching Law and Order. And just as elite university student Peter Kelly was told by his father in that admissions episode I mentioned earlier, I say to the college protesters, it's time to step into the real world. So that's my take on it for today. I'd like to maybe get some counter opinions or have a little debate or maybe some reinforcement of what I said by bringing in my producer, Rich.
Hey.
He's off at another site and hopefully was able to sleep through that little presentation. But Rich and I have had conversations offline a little bit about some of these topics too, but really wanted to get his opinion on this topic in particular. I don't want to be, like the one quote said, is there's kind of an education and it's a dialogue and it's talking. It's a lot about what I try to do on this podcast is inform, but I'm also most of the time I'm trying to be honest to what my opinions are in the end,
Right.
and not to hide any punches. So, but again, part of it is about debate. It's about talking to others, and sometimes things other people say may shape that opinion and may change it a little bit, tweak it on the edges, and that's why I really look forward to chatting with Rich. Rich, any thoughts on the topic?
Well, the problem is that every university where there have been protests has its own story. And Columbia and UCLA are probably the ones getting the most attention because of the actions of the police most recently. Um, it's interesting because, you know, college campuses since the 60s have always been this place where we've kind of encouraged this young Americans and young students to kind of come up with their own opinions on things. And UB, University of Buffalo, which is around the corner from us here in Niagara Falls, where I am, have its own history in the 60s and 70s of protests and having to close the student union. And there's so much history of that time period. And they were fighting back then for things that I think profoundly changed America in so many ways. This young generation, I think, believes they're doing something similar. They very early on, talking to young people that I still see a lot of, even though I'm retired, we're immediately frustrated by Israel reaction to the attacks in October. Almost as if they knew what Israel was going to do. And in many ways, a lot of the talks on social media, X, etc., were that, yep, they almost wanted this. This would be the kind of the feeling that a lot of younger folks feel, and that a lot of things in this country have a lot of financial backing from people that are pro-Israeli. And I think that the colleges early on and a lot of like pro-Palestinian groups asked their colleges, to divest from or at least acknowledge what kinds of funds were coming from Israel. And the colleges, because a lot of their viewers, their donors like Robert Kraft and those types of folks, were unwilling to no one ever wants to push back against the donors. And I think the students started to get frustrated by that. And as things have gotten worse in Palestine, and there hasn't been the release of hostages and all those things that, blah, 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 and as well as other attacks, I think it's just the students have gotten frustrated and they've started to react. I think in the case of the encampments and some of the other things, I agree with you that I think they were misguided in terms of what they thought would work. But they got the attention that they wanted, and maybe not in the way they wanted it, not with the positive feedback. But I'm not sure they care what our generation thinks. I think that they've decided that they're going to bide their time and make the changes when they get their chance. I feel like that is kind of what they're I don't think they really think that Congress is going to change its mind on things unless some people start getting voted out. And I think young people, since even the 2022 election, we talked about this in a previous episode, that the young people will make a difference in who the next president is. And I think that and I've read a lot about this online, there's a lot of sentiment with young people and we talked about this, I think, last week. I mean, that might have been the week before, but that they don't care if they lose, if the Democrats lose this election, because they feel that's the only way the Democrats will start listening to them. That's kind of my interpretation of it. I think a lot of the silliness of what they've been doing on campuses is gotten weird, but I think the colleges also have not handled this well at all from a public relations standpoint. Columbia is not going to recover from this anytime soon.
I don't think so. No.
And I think colleges are going to look at this in a different. I think some of these colleges are going to have to say, "Ooh, we've got to find a way to," because they're the adults, they're the ones in charge. It's their job to find ways for the people that are going to spend lots of money at these colleges, whether it's student loans or the parents or whatever. Like at the end of the day, it's customer service, and I think these colleges have really dropped the ball on both sides. They've dropped the ball with their donors. They've dropped the job with some of their staff. they're going to lose staff because a lot of the staffs are siding with the students, and they're going to lose students. And the funding makes colleges go around. So that's my interpretation on this. I don't agree. I don't want anyone to think that I agree with some of the things the colleges were doing. The hall, is it Harrison Hall in Columbia, for example, that was supposedly damaged?
Yeah.
But I also can't stand watching the way that the police went into the campus. Like it's just, especially since there were very specific rules that were enacted 55 years ago about how police were supposed to be allowed on the college campuses. Students were supposed to have a say in that. They forego those rules. And Columbia, ironically, was one of the trend centers, and now they've become what they hated back 50 years ago. So that's my interpretation of it. I having taught students for 31 years at the high school level, they don't make the best decisions, and I'm not saying that these college campus protests have made great decisions, but their mindset, their political mindset, is very different from the establishment.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it in kind of in the biggest sense, this I don't I mean, do you think that these I think it's a very impractical worldview, I guess, is kind of the biggest point that I have for all of this. And it's also very close-minded to not see that their mere presence at Columbia is they're part of the beneficiaries of the kinds of stuff that they complain about in American policy and foreign policy and global economic agreements and all that sort of stuff. They are benefactors of that, and it's a little bit. I don't know. It gives me the wrong, like,
You're saying
it's
that,
an immature view that they
yeah,
don't
they
see
go
that
to
they're
Columbia, but then
right,
expect, which is an elitist university, let's be honest, they are,
right.
um, and then are surprised that they're elitist. Yeah, like it's the line from Casablanca. I'm shocked to find out that there's gambling
There's gambling going on here, Rick.
establishment.
Yeah,
It's like,
Rick's
and there is that. I agree with that. But I would also say that if I was a young person and I was going to say wanted to be a journalist student, and I just saw this on the news today that journalism students, they used to be diverse in terms of outlets and newspapers, et cetera, would hire from a broad range of journalistic backgrounds, and nowadays they're hiring, like, I think over 50% of their journalism students
right.
for jobs from elite college universities, and they're not picking up the guy from Buff State or a small Florida university
Yeah,
that
and Congress has
yeah,
significant representation from this very same places.
right.
Boardrooms have representation from some of the very same places. I saw kind of burrowing down from from the big picture into the weeds a little bit. There's been several articles and discussions recently in the past few days about how corporate employers are souring on Ivy Leaguers as candidates and are looking to the kind of another tier of schools, which include some public universities and things like that. So that's a direct impact. And actually, I believe the one person I mentioned in my presentation, the NYU the Student Bar Association person
Right.
who came out and made comments. Um, I think he was kind of blackballed. I think he had a job offer that was rescinded. So, and there's been some of them who say they recognize that they're blackballing themselves. So there is a portion of them
As
who
long as they recognize that
get the fact that they're going against this.
right. I haven't heard too many students in quite often. One of the things that drive me crazy is the people that practice free speech and then think that that means that they can still go to work the next day. Not understanding that you have free speech, but you
And that
don't.
happened to the Google employees who did the sit-in and disrupted stuff, and then
Right.
because they
Where
wanted
at
them not
least
to, they
these
wanted Google not
students,
to do business with Israel, and then they got fired.
yeah. In general, a lot of these students do seem to understand that that they know what they're doing. That they know that it's going to have long, profound effects on them, especially being arrested. and things like that. It's funny because most of the time we complain that we don't like the college indoctrination, right? Like these kids are going to college and they're getting these warped ideas and blah 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 blah. But then when they go to the elite universities that you're complaining about that they have these whack things, but then but then the establishment is mad at them for like it's just a weird, like to me it's kind of an ironic twist that you know that that the college isn't the one they're not getting these views per se from the colleges, because if the colleges were so worried about um the views that these students were developing, then they probably would have gotten rid of those professors if they could have under tenure rules. I know that's just
Well, that
difficult.
was the thing I mentioned, that
Yeah.
some of the universities you mentioned funding, some of them are getting funding from the Middle East and from Qatar and other places.
Yeah. Cutter is a
And
big
they're
one.
supporting the, like the Middle East studies departments and things like that at these schools. So the professors are also some cases on board with them. And another side note is that we understand that not everybody protesting on campus is a student there.
Right.
Some of these people are chipped in. I know a number of the people, a portion of the people, maybe a third or more of the people who got arrested at Columbia in the past few days were not students at the college there.
Right.
So we get that's a part of it. But I
that
think
that probably, if I was a student in that protest, I would have been frustrated by that, because I knew that my message or what I was trying to accomplish was getting hijacked. And there are professional protesters, and I'm not a conspiracy person guy who, and this day was all paid. It was, it was the cute, whatever, just organization in disguise, and it was the CIA and all that crap. I'm not that kind of thing, but there were definitely people there, and it's been that are agitators, and I
I mean,
think they
I tell you what, this, you know, I've heard for many years from the far right people and right wing commentators and individual people about they have this worry about the threat to America and all this other stuff and the changing kind of attitudes and among other things, and railing kind of about the things that are going on and the how our youth are being taught. It's a topic of big concern, like here in Florida, where book banning and curriculum are big topics for for K through 12
right.
students. And and then there's the concern at universities about the indoctrination and how liberal the professors and things are. And I have to say that these recent events, um, I don't think it's as bad as they think it is, because I think, like the rest of us, we get older and our ideas start to mellow a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah.
But I do think that I am sincerely concerned about the outlook. And really, if it didn't come through in what I wrote today and what I delivered at the beginning, is this America loathing part, that America is always wrong, because that I mean, I think if you played tippy toe with terrorists and with Putin and with other total maniacal assholes that are out there, I think I don't think you can sugarcoat it. I mean, another kind of a film reference, not a TV reference, but a film reference, was the movie Lone Survivor. And in the movie, if you've seen it or not, but in the movie, there's a group of American soldiers. They're in Afghanistan. They land on a hilltop, kind of in the mountains, and they want to go down into this village to kill some of the Taliban that are there, capture or kill Taliban leadership that's embedded in the village. And right after they get there, there's like this goat herder that comes up the hill and is right by them and everything like that. And he's there, and they're deciding, And then they kind of confront him, and they're deciding whether they should let him go back to the village or not. Well, I'm sitting there at the TV set screaming, "You got to kill him." I mean, I kind of know that they're not, because the movie probably wouldn't happen. And it's a real to life story. But I'm like, in war, it's kill or be killed. And I hate in my teaching. I mean, I took classes on a single class on Vietnam and the Vietnam War when I was in college. And the experience of those soldiers was they didn't know who the enemy was, and they're 18 and 19 years old, and they're dropped in the jungle, and they have to make life or death decisions about who's on their side, and they don't know who is. And I'm sitting there going, kill them and save yourself. Don't risk it, and I know maybe it's a bloodthirsty way of looking at it, but I wanted my team to come home safe. I wanted the guys on our squad to not have to face that. And I didn't, I can understand, maybe not to the extent of Abu Ghraib or anything like that, but I can understand when you're in those positions. I haven't served, but I fully respect the fact that I can appreciate how those people felt in those circumstances. And that's on a global scale, taking out from that individual incident that I witnessed. I look at things and I say, some of these times we have to, we pick sides with jerks sometimes because it's the lesser of two jerks. Sometimes we have to support causes that may not be totally just, because one, it benefits us, two, it benefits an ally perhaps, and three, sometimes you can only meet that kind of hatred for us and for an ally with similar, heat. Now, I'm not endorsing everything that Israel's done in this circumstance, but because there is some line of thought that, like you mentioned, like, I'm not sure that Netanyahu didn't want this kind of thing, or it's like, okay, peace didn't do him well, and it gave him an opportunity.
The problem is
in a lot of
that
ways.
Israel majorly miscalculated this whole thing.
Right.
Much like the United States majorly miscalculated going into Iraq.
But bear in mind, if Hamas had released the prisoners that they took on October 7th and have agreed to exchanges,
right,
from what I understand, of some of the, kind of like convicted criminal terrorists that from the Hamas side, who Israel holds as an exchange, but they won't agree to it. And I mean, like it or not, that's, hey, like, just like my comment to the youth out there, it's kind of the real world. And I think if you
I think when it comes down to it, like, and again, having gone, I went to a protest back in November. And one of the things that, when you listen to the groups, like, one of the things that's really changed my opinion on a lot of this is being at that protest and seeing the people go up to the stage one by one. They've represented so many different groups, including American Jewish people, like Jewish rabbis that are American, that are not pro-Israel. Like, the amount of Jewish people in this country that are not pro-Israel. And I get very tired that anytime you say anything against Israel, you're accused of being anti-Semitic. And I'm like, that's not true. That I am not anti-Semitic. I have concerns about the way the Israeli government does business. That is not anti-Semitic. And that has been manipulated by like different associations, and you see them on the news all the time saying that there's been a growth of anti-Semitic hate in this country. And I definitely think it went up, but they're including everything in their calculations based on anyone who says that Netanyahu in Israel is making bad decisions. They don't, like, they're not following a lot of basic, and I'm not saying Hamas either but when you're the superpower and if you want to be on the right side of history on these things, you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. The United States, Germany made all kinds of mistakes in World War II, but everybody understood that they were the evil ones. But when you find out some of the bad decisions maybe the Americans made or the Axis powers made, the Allies made, then you can say, well, wait a second, I thought you guys were the good guys. And that's the thing. Israel wants to be the good guys, but then they do some things that are just wrong. And they lost this, they can't keep playing that sympathy card. And I think that's what the young people view it as. They view Israel very
Well,
much the
I
way.
think the young people are playing a sympathy card for the Palestinians at the
And
same
I
time.
think that they feel
And I
they
don't
should. They're comparing it to, and I think it is very equatable to Israel and Palestine is very similar to me in so many ways to what we dealt with South Africa and apartheid. It's there's a lot of similarities, and a lot of people from South Africa will tell you that they agree with what I just said, and that was in my.
what was it? But what is it? But what was America's involvement
Well,
with
because
that?
we used to support South Africa an awful lot. And then when young people in the 80s, musicians in particular, started drawing a lot of attention to what was going on, and they started putting pressure on companies like Coca-Cola and stuff like that, money stopped flowing into South Africa. And then our political leaders started to change their views. The difference is there wasn't a lot of South African financial interests in the United States to the level that Israel has influence in our government and within our companies. And
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I think
the
that I
difference.
just I'm not sure I see the parallel, considering that, well, UN, Britain, others, and the US were the ones who helped Israel become a nation there, and help form that, and then it's been kind of a long-term relationship like that. I don't think we were ever as embedded, or
No,
there,
I,
and
I don't mean,
there's not this
I just mean
clear,
the way,
the enemies there, like, they weren't fighting an external force, or
right.
it was an internal, it was basically more like a civil rights struggle that was going on in South Africa
Right, but you people
than.
in that area of the world consider that Israel took part of Palestine, and
Well, that's what they think. Yeah, that's where they take it.
and they essentially were foreign invaders the same way the white people that took over South Africa were not from
Or
there.
the white people who swindled Indians out of Manhattan.
And that's why there is that, and that's why there are young people that say like America should be that shining city on the hill, but quite often we haven't been. And I think that's what younger people are frustrated by.
So
And
so if the first, as far as the protesters go, um, I mean, I don't this whatever they're doing isn't working, I don't
no,
think,
it's not.
and it's beyond, and like, they need to figure out a way to go back to peacefully doing this, and they need to sort, just like the Palestinians need to do with Hamas and Hezbollah. They need to sort themselves out on kind of their message on this thing, and get it right and do it in appropriate ways. The universities need to be proactive about enforcing the rules and make sure they do it in appropriate ways. And we would not be, in this situation now, and we probably wouldn't be having this podcast. So that's kind of that part of it. But if you unbundle what's going on in Israel and Palestine, what is the U.S. government? Okay, we know. Okay, U.S. government should tell Israel. But what is the outcome between Israel and Palestine that you can hope for in the
I
short
mean,
run?
in the short run,
What are these people, other than, what they want Israel to just plain out withdraw? Is that it? And then what
I don't
happens?
think that. I mean, there are certainly those factions of people that think Israel should not even be there. And I don't mean it from like the Iran standpoint where they should be blown off the planet. I don't mean that. I mean they did that they shouldn't have. They should have never been there in the first place.
You mean
But most
in
reasonable
the
people,
space that they're in,
yeah,
or
most
attacking Gaza?
reasonable people are that there needs to be a two-state solution. And our government often talks about a two-state solution, but they don't really push for it. And I just don't think we're going to get a president or an administration, throughout our government that's ever going to push for the two-state solution. People
Well,
just say that
but
because
it's
it
it's
sounds
been
good.
it's been talked about multiple times,
But they
and
don't. Yeah,
then
but like we do
and
have
then don't forget that the other side isn't agreeing either.
right. The United States could really push harder with Israel, and they just don't. And we know that there are presidents that have, Reagan in
But
particular.
how would that change anybody's opinion? How would
Uh,
it change the
if,
facts on the ground or anything? We could push all we want. Hamas and those groups have influenced their own people to not agree to those things.
sure.
Because if you do, you'll end up like I think we've talked about before. You end up like Anwar Sadat in Egypt, where you're a traitor because you made a deal with the Israelis.
Right.
And Hamas is one of those groups, and maybe Netanyahu's part of the same club that really doesn't benefit from a peaceful solution or a two-state solution. And bear in mind too that Palestinian Arabs are not a big part, but they're 20% or so of the Israeli parliament. So they are involved in the government there. Obviously not a majority, so they can't figure much. But what I just don't know. I know it's can be frustrating, and it's frustrating to the youth and frustrating to other people who are doing. But I just from the practical perspective, how does the if you want to blame the U.S. for this stuff, how does the U.S. enforce it?
Well, it's funny going back to the U.S. has the power of the purse with Israel. They do, um, because at the end of the day, the United States wants something from Israel, but at the moment, it's not helping them. The Israel's approach, and at the end of the day, if you're the guy in power, you're the party in power, and you have a chance of losing that power because of that, your own self-interest should guide you. In terms of the college campus people, this started as they wanted the college itself to
Divest themselves of
divest. That's what
yeah.
this started as. And I still think that's a big reason of then the other folks that got involved wanted to make a big political statement. They're it started
But
though on
but the
most of these
divestment is somewhat unrealistic too. I mean,
right.
they
They
want all major corporations to not be involved with Israel and do all this other stuff. And they say, okay, well, so the
let's
university could
take a
turn up their nose
corporation.
to certain money or whatever,
Let's
but
take a
there's other things that
corporation
they're asking for. Again,
sorry.
it's not practical. It's not
But
going to get done.
there are practical, like let's take a company like Starbucks. So Starbucks is down 35% their stock value this year. And it is really been, and the two articles that I read are about this earlier, was partially because of their unwillingness to let their stores unionize. And then also because there was this thing going around that Starbucks was funding things in Israel. And I have to this day have not been able to get clarity on it. But there
Right.
clearly is a perception, and for Starbucks, that perception has become reality. Their stock's down, and young people are a huge consumer of Starbucks, literally, and they're just not going there right now. And and
So you're
Starbucks
saying
has
that the
got a
problem
problem.
with the youth of today is their caffeine deficiency.
Yeah, I mean, so so you can force corporations to make changes in their policy if you stop buying their products. And that is the power of what young people do have, and I think that is what they're kind of after. And the young people in this country have a lot of frustrations. When you look at interest rates on mortgages,
Oh
when you
yeah.
look at what it costs to go to college, when you look at a cost to buy a house and how much has gone up in 3 years, like interest rates have gone up by 5% in 3 years. The property values of houses have gone up on general
Yeah,
60 or
I think
100%.
in a very short period, I think the median house has gone from like 280 to 420 or something. I think I heard last week.
Salaries haven't gone up, and corporate profits have gone up, but
They have
everyone's expecting these
not
college.
sufficiently.
Yeah, but everybody's expecting college kids to go work for these corporations, and they're starting to see like I can't even pay off my interest loans, and oh, they shouldn't have got those loans. Well, okay, that's great for us that went to a SUNY school like me, back in the day, and it was like $600 a semester or $900 a semester versus $7 grand a semester for my son to go to UB. Back a semester, and that was just a couple years ago. So $15,000, and that was to live at home.
Right.
Then he had a car expense and all those things, and so even with that, if he didn't have his father and mother helping him out, he would have ended up with, let's assuming he did it in 4 years, he ends up with what, $50,000 of debt. And yeah, he could work on that, but I don't know what job he's paying off $50,000 with, when he still has to have a car and he still has to buy books. And so, I mean, young
That,
people are frustrated, and I think this is just another example of where their frustrations with this country has manifested itself.
well, it's interesting. I wish they would, you know, I was a little disappointed that more like Occupy Wall Street died and those kind of things, and that after that crisis, nobody from Wall Street ever went to jail.
Right.
Nobody repaid a penny. The government bailed the whole thing out. That was kind of a, there was an event where, young people would you would think, you know, those are causes that, you think you'd want them to take up. And I'm just concerned with with the ones that they're taking up. I don't like the America is always wrong vis-a-vis the world part. I don't like the fact
I
that
agree with
I
that. I
I, I
mean,
don't like the fact that they're not there's a lot of issues that young people could take up, and I'd be right there with them on it. And I think, kind of like on the airplane, and people use this analogy a fair amount. You got to put your own mask on before you put it on the person next to you. Um, I think we got to get shit straightened out in this country first, and some of these, kind of equality issues and other things. And I just don't know for what their agenda is now. And maybe they'll everybody grows from liberal to conservative or largely over a period of time. A lot of those college protesters that were out there in the Vietnam War era went on and, became like Ben and Jerry's,
right.
executives or whatever. So they found themselves a way. They found their way into god awful capitalism that they hated, and found a different way, as they got older. So I think some of that's going to happen, but in the short run, I just wish they would pick up on some of these other. There's plenty of stuff. There's plenty of stuff, and plenty of stuff that's you could probably they could impact, and they could move, rather than starting with some of these other things. And I don't think that by taking on these causes, you know, whether you're a pro-Trumper or an anti-Trumper, or you're somewhere in the middle and you don't really care. I think these people, again, are another group that leans that the Democrats generally are closer to meeting what they want. Yet they're probably, whatever these people do, they're probably going to get Trump in, and they need to be careful, because if they think it's bad for I don't think it's going to get better for Palestine when this happens. I don't think it's going to get better for on campus, allowing more free speech on campuses and things like that. I don't think those things are going to get better, and for them. So and yeah, they want to blow the whole thing up. But be careful about blowing the whole thing up, because you may not be able to recover it in any short order. Not only will it most likely be worse for your causes in the short run, you may not be able to recover it for quite a long time.
I agree with that, and I've said that to young people that I know that are involved with these things locally, or that are in other cities and stuff that I'm still close with. And I say that, just be careful about that. And many of them, admittedly say, yeah, I'll probably hold my nose in November. Um, but at some point is they're going to be enough is enough, and that they're sick of just the campaign promises that, well, we're not as bad as that guy. And I think some people are saying the only way to teach somebody a lesson is to really take away their power. Um, Like even like something simple this week, like the Democrats were talking about how to reconnect, and they were like, well, let's bring out Hillary Clinton. That was actually a talking point with the Democratic National Party, and I was like, but she's the reason we're in the situation we're in, because she wasn't someone that was electable, and and you made us, I mean us as a people, the choice of that guy or her, and neither one of them, like, and he was funny, like, and she was just unlikable at that time. He was more likable at that point. He's less likable now, obviously, but people were just, I don't want her. And that is, and then, oh, we're going to bring her out because that'll sway some people. I don't know who they think that she's not helping anybody. Like, she's worse.
No.
And but it's like, again, I think the Democratic Party is completely out of touch with their younger constituents, and they just.
But but it's a far bend to go to where this group is
Oh,
currently at.
I agree.
It's
I,
a.
yeah,
I mean, they would have to be really good politicians by talking out of both sides of
right.
their mouth, by meeting the moderate wing of their party, or even the middle of their party, with what some of the left, what some of the
That
progressives
that is a
are
really good
promoting.
point. I guess the really good point is that the folks that are pushing these causes think that the party should go really far left, and that is not ever going to happen. Because that's
Not
not an
now,
electable
not right
position.
away.
It may happen in like comparatively in other countries it has, but going to the extremes. But it's very tough to hold power for very long if you're at one of those extremes. You get a very short period of time, and you just, because eventually people just get fed up and they vote you out, as long as there hasn't been something majorly changed in your constitution. But I think that there's definitely that. But there's also that aspect when you talk to young people, like we talk to young people, and we say to them, like, well, you guys should, yeah, okay, boomer,
Right.
and they have to learn it for themselves. Just like there are things our parents told us,
Right.
and we didn't really listen, and now, and then 10 years later we get where they were coming from, and that is the power of being youth, that you think you're right about everything,
I just hope
until,
they
like,
I just hope they
until
grow
your
up
car
soon.
breaks down at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to change a tire, and all of a sudden dad's a superhero.
I
um
hope I hope they just grow up soon enough and
yeah,
have kids of their own. If any of them are still interested in that, because that's when it all comes back to roost.
for
That's when
sure,
all that BS that you thought you're sitting there nodding at your parents when they
for
told
sure.
you stuff like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Then all of a sudden, once you have kids, all those things, like, oh man, I didn't realize they were right. Oh my
It
God.
is, it does
So
change your perspective, and again, like, the ignorance, that things that we thought we knew the answer to because we couldn't understand the other perspective. And to be fair, we don't have any when you're 22. You don't have a lot of ways to understanding that perspective because you haven't lived it. And
yep,
until you live a little bit of that, and you see death, and you see, you see what a bankruptcy is like, and you see all the illness, and a bad job, and a bad, like, I used to say, like, a bad boss, a bad neighbor, a bad spouse, like there's so many things that you experience as you get older, and that those experiences will change your perspective on things.
yep.
And they just they haven't experienced enough. That doesn't discharge their opinions. But I go back to my original point. I think that their approach, their mission statement should have been, in terms of what their steps were, is not been the has not got the desired effect that they thought that it would.
Real quick before we close out, but kind of what you said reminds me of that. Youth is supposed to have an optimistic view. I feel like things are still possible. They haven't been beaten down by life yet,
Right.
and I think kind of that's part, maybe all in all this stuff I talked about, the seeming hatred of America that's in their voices and all that stuff, and a lot of that could be, like you said, a function of a lot of stresses in their young lives and things
Right.
like that maybe we didn't experience quite the same way, of course, not like a pandemic among other things.
Well, that's the thing.
But
The last 4 or 5 years have been very rough on young people.
right, but the one thing though about it is that what I'm missing from this entire movement is optimism. That they're angry. They're so angry about this stuff, and they're so dug in, and like, damn it, you're too young to be dug in. You're too young to be this grumpy and miserable. Leave that to those of us of our age and beyond who are good at it.
And I'm sure
And
that
we're
the
well
dads and
practiced at it.
moms, I'm sure the dads, the moms, and the presidents and the colleges of all those days were saying the same thing to the kids in the 60s that were protesting Vietnam.
Right.
And you know, for civil rights and female and women's rights. So I do feel like it all does come full circle. And that's, I think, the irony of all of this is that, and you said it, many of the adults that are now making these decisions probably had a tie-dyed shirt on in like 1968. Like they
Yep.
probably did.
Yep.
And you know, now they just, but I was the cool man. I was so cool.
Oh man, I
I
mean,
went to Woodstock. I had
also a University of Buffalo graduate here, and my professors. I had my one professor who told me that the only reason he went to college there was to get out of the draft for Vietnam. I had another one who was talking about being at the rallies and flipping the bird to the FBI and the people who were watching them and everything like that. And this was, you know, a good 15, 20 years later, and they kind of, you know, then they became part of the structure of the university instead of protesting all that the university was doing. So very interesting. I think, Rich, I think we'll just close on that note. I don't have too much further to say. So I think for today's podcast, we'll close it out. Did you have any final thoughts?
No, I think the most important thing is I don't think a lot of topics you and I have been very similar. I think been on the same boat on, and I think I'm a little bit, I think I'm a little bit more left on this one, which is kind of surprising for me. But again, it is based on the, you know, and I, the fact that we can have this conversation and not be like that effing jerk, like, you know, like that is the biggest point that I think you wanted to make with this podcast is that we have to have discussions, and neither one of us raised our voice and said something about, you know, whatever. We just had the discussion, and hopefully you know, I think I got some good points of things you said, and theoretically you should have whatever. And that's the purpose of this discussion. And hopefully we can have civil discussions, not just us, but everyone can have some civil discussions and not necessarily lose their marbles.
Absolutely. I still love your brother more than I did when we started the show.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thanks, everybody. Remember, this is They're All Lying to Us. Look for us on our website, www.lyingtous.com. There you can find copies of earlier access to earlier podcasts. You can find them on Spotify. You can find them on YouTube. Look for them there, and you can find the printed editions of the blog articles at the website as well. Everybody, on May 2nd, 2024, signing off. This is Andy. Thanks for your attention. Everybody have a good day. Stay well.